Shweta.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to all of you who have joined this live stream today. We're delighted to see so many familiar names from our Founding Fuel community and many new ones as well. I'm Sweta Basra from the Founding Fuel team and the host today. I head operations and edit for Founding Fuel. This conversation on the theme, India at 100, a vision for transformative change, is with Ravi, Venkatesan and Naushad folks, and it will be anchored by Arun Maira. Now, India at 100 is a theme we'll be exploring over the next few weeks. This conversation is but a beginning. We all feel that this is a crucial discussion for the country to have today. In the 75 years since independence, how progressive is India? And how should we even define progress? Despite the strides India has made, the fruits are still out of the reach of many, many people. The next 25 years to 2047, when independent India will be 100, is yet another opportunity to take stock of where we are, where do we want to go as a nation, and what will take us there? What do we need to learn, and what do we need to unlearn? Now, Mr. Venkatesan, Mr. Forbes, and Mr. Maira don't really need an introduction. All three are among the most respected business thought leaders in the country today, and most of you will already be familiar with their profiles, so I'll keep it short. Mr. Venkatesan is a board member, author, and founder of the Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship. Mr. Forbes is co-chairman, Forbes-Marshall, and former president of CII. And Mr. Maira, who is anchoring this chat, is a former member of the Planning Commission of India and former chairman, BCG India. But before I hand it over to Mr. Maira and the panel, here's our bright young colleague, Arjun Chaudhary, who is interning with Founding Fuel. He'll make a short presentation. Over the last week or so, Founding Fuel has been speaking to a bunch of young people across the country. We were coached by our friends at Crypto Research, which is led by Pure Mukherjee. We wanted to listen them to understand what do the youth who will shape this trajectory over the next 25 years and be the most affected by it, what do they envision for India's future? Here's Arjun with some vignettes from what we've heard. Arjun?
Thanks, Shweta. I'm just going to throw on the presentation. Fantastic. So, hi everyone, my name is Arjun Chaudhary. I'm a second-year economics student at the University of Toronto. I'm currently interning with Founding Fuel during my summer break. The India at 100 project is my first assignment, and India at 100 as such offers a simple framework for anyone to work with. Where is India going, and how do we bring about the changes we seek? Today, these questions are asked and answered by experienced minds who rely on decades of built wisdom to chart out a course for the next 25 years. But how does young India think about the India of the future? And more importantly, what are the issues and challenges that are on their minds? To find out, my colleagues and I decided to simply ask them. And as we soon discovered, it's never really that simple. Some of us tried to ask the two quick questions. What do they care about the most, and what would they like to see most of all in India of the future? Plus, what needed to change if the intended future was to become reality? We initially didn't get enough insights. The process clearly required deep listening, and it required a lot more. For anything meaningful to emerge, we soon realized it had to go beyond simply asking questions and collecting data. So we did the next best thing. We requested the experienced team from Crypto Research, a boutique qualitative research firm, to coach us on how to listen well to these fresh young voices, how to tune into their thoughts and their lived experiences. Quipper taught us how to pay attention to individual narratives, to hear with a degree of empathy and understand the forces that shape them. To listen in with curiosity and willingness to accept that what you will initially hear is not going to be what you want to hear. And we learned that it pays to spend time on warm-ups. The result? We received a beautiful patchwork of stories that are in no way a representative sample from which we can mine insights, but rather offer us a sense of hopes and fears of young Indians from various different walks of life. Engineers, store owners, students, CCTV vendors, and social entrepreneurs. From Lucknow, Buland, Meerut, Ahmedabad, Satara, Delhi, Chennai, Bangalore, and many, many other places, a diverse group does invariably mean diverse opinions. So what did we hear? I've attempted to call out three big themes supported by individual voices so that it gives you a better sense of the conversations. You will, of course, find the actual video conversations on the Notion site that we've created for you. Here's theme one. The 9, the 9 to 5 regime is out of favor. Throughout our conversations, hearing a deep desire for financial independence that employment just cannot offer. If you see the quotes I've picked out, it'll give a flavor of how they're thinking and also their rising aspiration for a better life. Ria, who's 28, who runs a cloud kitchen in Lucknow, says, "I've never wanted to do a 9 to 5 job for a limited salary. A limited salary will not cover my personal experiences." Kushagra from Milan went a step further, saying, "Right from school days, we're told your expenses are 25,000 to 30,000. When you're not earning enough, how will your expenses be? So I've never even thought of doing a job. Rupees 10,000 to 15,000 after working 9 to 5 is just not going to do." Yogesh from Chandrapur had similar sentiments. Within metros, however, there was a deep concerning regarding social issues and how India is responding to them. Young entrepreneurs here are committed to using their enterprises to combat issues such as climate change or promoting inclusivity. Rishabh Pote, whose Moshak Tech operates in the cloud space, told me, "We're pushing green solutions. While we aren't seeing a big demand yet, I believe it will increase in the future." Nupur Rajguru, who runs a business selling alternative fashion jewelry in Mumbai and Pushkar, emphasized her desire to see more acceptance of individuality, saying, "We need to have more people who are comfortable in their skins and who they are." That brings us to our second theme. Young women are stepping up and want to be on par with young men of their generation. Their self-confidence and self-awareness amongst all young women we spoke to was quite striking, especially young women in their late 20s who lived and operated businesses outside the metros. They seemed confident in their roles as trendsetters. There's a lot that had changed, they said, in their ways and the ways the families empowered them. Here's what they told us. I've thrown a few quotes out on the screen. Pragya told us, "Every 5 years, we didn't have the ideas and opportunities that social media now allows. I see the difference in my family, in my circle. Girls' education is now being given equal importance. I had no knowledge about business, but I still get a lot of support from my family who are proud of me now." Nupur has similar sentiments. However, the pressure cannot simply come from young people themselves, with society also having to adopt to be more flexible. Pragya noted this, saying, "Today you have to persuade your family to let you run a business. 10 years from now, these barriers won't exist." The last big takeaway was on education and the need for education reform. Students and recent grads we spoke to spoke passionately about changes to the education system as it exists. I've thrown a few quotes on the screen for you to go through. Pragya says, "Our education system focuses a lot on concept and theory. I wish there was more on what it's like in the real life." And Sanghamitra also echoed similar sentiments. So what will India be like in 2047? There were a range of responses, and I've picked a few quotes and put them on the screen for you to go through. I won't read out the quotes, you'll be able to read them off the slides. But here's what struck us as interesting. Across the board, there was a desire to see members of the new generation taking more responsibility in their communities. Young Indians overwhelmingly wanted their compatriots to take more active roles, determining the way the country is headed. All the quotes you have read today are in service of that goal. From Naresh, who's working to make sure laborers have a voice of their own, to Pragya and Rhea, who hope that their examples help further the number of women running businesses of their own. These entrepreneurs' goals towards 2047 is to ensure that their compatriots are as involved and capable as they are. Thanks for hearing me out. Back to you, Shweta.
Thank you, Arjun. So I heard three things, really. One was an aspiration for a better life. Another was that they want to be actively involved in building out this new India, and that education reforms is a big thing that seems to be cutting across, all the people that we spoke with. So that's what I heard. Before I hand it over to Mr. Maira and the panel, a quick reminder, my colleague Charles Assisi is anchoring the YouTube chat. Do keep your questions and comments coming in. Mr. Maira, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Arjun. That was very inspiring. Very well done. And thank you, Sweta, for now giving it over or setting it up so well. Naushad and Ravi, I want to introduce myself to you. We have been friends for a long time, and we've talked about India, the future of India, many times, and talked about what we believe needs to change in our country to make it the country that at least we three and the others that we know aspire to make of India. So to hear now voices of others, it's refreshing, one's own view of what India should become. And so here we are. But right now we are at a very important moment for the whole world. The world is disordered. Globalization, which was the big theme, bringing the world together for the last 30 years, has in the last few years broken down. Trade was broken down by the COVID and the restrictions. Flows of finance have been really curbed by the response to the Ukraine crisis. And the flow of ideology, or the dominance of an ideology, has been shaken up, and by the recent, again, troubles in Ukraine and around Ukraine, the view that has been prevailing for the last 30 odd years, that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the history of ideology had ended, according to Francis Fukuyama, because he said that the two ideologies, the one which was about how to run a society, which is liberal democracy, and the other is how to run an economy, which is free market capitalism, have won forever. Right now, within even the United States and many countries of Europe, it's these two ideologies, the battle between them, between the idea of a liberal democracy and the idea of running an economy as a free market capitalist system, had been contending with each other, and different political forces have been arising in the US and in Europe and so on. Authoritarianism, we call it, and we don't like it. It seems not democratic. It's not. It's autarkic. It's against free market globalization. So once again, the war in Ukraine, it says it's about imposing once again on the rest the idea of a liberal democracy combined with free market capitalism. But maybe there's some tension between the two, which has been playing out, which has now become alarmingly noted. At Davos this year, it's been mentioned that every 30 minutes in the last year, one new billionaire popped up in the world, and every 30 minutes in the last year, 1 million more people fell into poverty. So clearly, something has to change in the way the world is governing itself, both in terms of economics and in terms of the conduct of societies and governance. India joined globalization openly, more openly in the 1990s. We allowed finance to come into the country and investments to come into the country more freely, trade to flow across our borders more freely. And we opened our minds much more to the ideas of globalization and these ideas which I've just described. And they benefited us very greatly, actually, all these years. But here again, we are now being confronted with having to make a choice by the global problems, but whose side are we on? And what do we want to do now in terms of how we what sort of ideas are we going to use to improve ourselves, to put our own house in order? And our own house is not in order. We are, as we keep claiming, and we are so, incredible India because of our diversity. And also because we dared to become a democracy when we were very poor in 1947. China took a different course, authoritarian, and it seems to have, at least economically, progressed much further and made many people sort of question whether democracy is a good thing to have when you're poor. But India decided to do that, and I think Indians hold on to their love of their freedom very, very highly. In 1947, we declared our tryst with destiny, in which we said that every Indian will get, as soon as possible, all three freedoms: political freedom, social freedom, and economic freedom. Political freedom, well, from our colonial rulers, yes, but then through democracy, more political freedom in electoral systems. The second, in terms of social freedom, we still haven't got it. We are far away. Our Dalit community, Dalit friends, are still suffering from age-old discrimination. And in terms of economics, yes, I think most Indians yet haven't got the equal freedoms. A report by the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, well, not by them, but by the Institute of Competitiveness, which this report sponsored by the Economic Advisory Council released this week, pointed out many things. But one statistic struck there, which said that those who earn more than rupees 20,000 per month in India represent the upper 10% of India's population. 20,000 rupees per month, they represent the upper 10%. So I have to ask myself that the people I listen to, including my driver who earns 25 or 30,000 with a little bit every month, he's up the upper 10%. And I, think that the poor chap is having a very hard time, but there are apparently 90% people who earn much less than him. How do they support themselves and their families? So in terms of economics also, I think most Indians haven't got to the freedoms that some of us have been able to have with globalization. People say that India is not a country. It is something else. India is a movement. India is a movement of people who together, we the people, as we say in our constitution, are going to create a country in which every Indian will have all three freedoms. Now, if you're going to work together, we the people create the change, we have to have some agreement about where we want to go together. What are the goals we want to reach together? We haven't reached anywhere close to the tryst with destiny after 75 years. Will we get much closer to it or reach it in another 25 years? But to do that, we'll have to change the way we are going about progress. And that is, I think, the key question we have to ask ourselves today. What are we going to change in our approach to the economy, to society, to governance that will now enable us to come much closer to the goal that we all together wish to achieve? Young people are very important for this. We've been saying for the last, 15, 20 years, that India is going to reap a demographic dividend, that, the young people are going to be effective earners and savers, and it's on their backs that we would increase the size of our economy. And it's with their ideas that the future of India will be shaped. So we have been realizing, and I think some of us were waking up to it and trying to tell the others that, pursuing growth of the size of the economy as a goal, as a sort of single-minded goal, was not the solution. We had to look at the shape of the economy and what is going on inside the economy, especially with regard to opportunities for young people to earn with dignity and earn adequately, so they feel good about themselves and the ability to look after others in their families, and thus to also contribute towards the growth of a good economy, which is an inclusive economy. So it was important that we listen to what the young people want to have, and so it was very good to hear, Arjun, and thank you for so well bringing out what the young people that you met in the last few days. I'm going to, Ravi and Naushad, we've been through this before. Naushad, you and I have been through India at 75, which was also founded on the belief that India had an opportunity, the young people of India were the opportunity, and that's about 20 years ago. But as I said, in the last 20 years, just to be honest, I think we made some progress, but some people say we've actually slipped. The gap has increased between what India needs to be for everybody and what India is for everybody today. So I would ask you, both Ravi and Naushad, the first question, the one that was asked to these young people too. What would you like India, and let me start calling it Bharat also now, because I did notice that the Congress party at its Chintan Shivar, this meeting in Udaipur, and the BJP and others are sort of talking of Bharatiya, our own culture, our own principles. And so it's what would Bharat at 75 look like? What should it look like? What would you like to see in India 25 years from now, to feel good that what we have done in our lives has helped to contribute towards the India that all Indians would want? Naushad, I'm going to start with you. Please.
Sure. So thank you, Arun, and thank you, Arjun, for your very interesting comments that you collected from different people in different younger people in the country. Indeed, very important for us. Let me really try to do this more as a conversation, Arun. So what I'm going to do is to just react to a couple of things, make some comments around a couple of things, and maybe throw out a question or two, or maybe we can come to the questions later on. Let me start with one of the things that you mentioned right at the end. I will stick to calling it India, and India at 100, which is the official name for our country, and I'll stick with India, and I'll stick with India for the same reason that I believe globalization is actually overall and broadly a significant force for good. And let me give a couple of comments to support that view. If you look at India in the last 30 years, as we have integrated more with the world, certainly for the first 25 out of those 30 years, our overall growth rates have been higher than they've been ever earlier in our history. We've pulled actually more people out of poverty if you buy the official government statistics and also the statistics that get put out by various NGOs and think tanks. We've pulled more people out of poverty in these 30 years than again at any point in time in our history. And we've done so at a time that we've seen trade as one of the basic growth engines of the economy. We've gone from trade being around 15% of our GDP in 1991 to trade being around 40% of our GDP today. Now, does that mean that we do not have serious things to fix? We have serious things to fix. And there I have complete agreement with your perspective. The growth that we've seen has not been as inclusive as it needed to be. And the reason it's not been as inclusive as it needed to be is because too many millions of our fellow citizens are excluded from growth processes. And they're excluded from those processes because of one of the points that was mentioned by many of the younger people, because of failures in our education system, in access to education. And second, I would argue, because of failures in our employment system in the country. There were some interesting comments that were made about options for employment. And Ravi's wonderful recent book, which I'll hold up here, which it's a wonderful way of looking at potential careers that are different. It says you do not need to have a normal career. You do not need to have a job and then you go on to another job and you climb the corporate ladder. You can have a career where you build various aspects to your life, which might evolve and change. And you never really, I'm going to do disservice to Ravi, so you better correct it then later. You don't need to follow a particular employment path. You can instead be self-employed. You can really create, play a much more creative role. And when he and I had a conversation once, the comment that I made was, we're a country of 1.4 billion people. We add roughly 10 million people to our population at the present time each year, and will continue to do so for the next 15 years or so until our population peaks, and then we start leveling off for a while. So if we need to create really good livelihoods for 15 million people, 10 million people a year, I'm not sure that self-employment is going to solve the problem. I think what one needs is good jobs on a mass scale, good jobs that give people a livelihood that includes them in the country's prosperity and development. And we see this coming through every time, the famous case of the few hundred railway jobs that were advertised and received however many lakhs of applicants for a very small number of jobs. There's this need that people have for secure livelihoods. I think for some who have those privileges of access, who are not worried about where the next meal and where their roof is going to come from, I think they have greater options, and we should continue to constantly provide them with those greater options. But I will come back to, I think our problem is 10 million good jobs a year that need to be added. And those 10 million good jobs will need to come from manufacturing to a much greater extent than they have. It'll need to come from more formal services to a much greater extent than they have. And will need to come from informal services as they have, but with much greater protection built into those particular individual roles, where there is some basic health insurance that every individual has. There's some basic, maybe even unemployment insurance that every individual has. There's a basic social safety net for even someone working as an Uber driver or someone working as a delivery boy in very informal occupations. So the kind of country that I would like to look for, the country that I would want to see in 25 years, is a country where we continue to be a vibrant economy. We continue to target rapid economic growth as the main way in which we will have more resources available to share across society. That we're a society where a much larger proportion of our population has high achievements in education, high literacy and mathematics skills, so that they can participate in the economy in an effective way. A much more formalized and employment generating economy where the jobs we are creating, whether they're livelihoods or whether they're formal jobs in larger or smaller companies, is secondary, but I think we need them all given the numbers that we actually demand. So we see much more of employment that's actually in place in the country. And then I think one more point, which is going in a different direction, is really a comment on what I took away from those comments that I heard from the younger voices. What I heard was individual aspirations. Aspirations very much, but aspirations for a better life indeed very much, but aspirations that were very individual. In other words, we need to create conditions over these next 25 years where a much higher proportion of our population can fulfill its individual aspirations. And fulfilling individual aspirations is at the heart of liberalism. So liberalism, I would argue, is actually an approach, a philosophy that is entirely consistent with what we heard from those younger voices. Because individual aspiration, as opposed to suppressing your individual aspirations in some greater cause, communist China, for example, individual aspirations is what a liberal approach to organizing society, to organizing our polity is, it seems to me, all about. Let me stop there here, Ravi, and then we'll loop back, I'm sure, on many of these points.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Naushad, before I ask Ravi, I just want to repeat for my memory, the broad brush description that you gave for the India that you want to see in 25 years. A vibrant economy, then a rapid economic growth continuing to happen then, and of course will have to happen from now till then too, so that resources are available to share across the country. And you want to see by then an economy which has many more formalized jobs, which it doesn't have at the moment. So some transition will have to be made. You want to see it then, as also you want to see then that individuals are able to realize their aspirations and lead life as they want to, broadly. Yes. And also very importantly, that you would like to see India very connected with the global world then. And therefore, you also caution us not to retreat into Bharat, but to keep reminding ourselves that we were called India by others perhaps, but that is how we are placed in the world, and we should, we should be all right with that. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you.
You did a better job. You did a better job of articulating what I meant than I did.
Of course. You're so sweet. Ravi, what are you?
Well, I have to agree with Naushad. He's a dear friend, and I've also read his terrific book. It's hard to focus, but anyway, a lot of the sort of the what and some of the how is in that. So I'd encourage people who are interested in this topic to read that. But to your question, Arun, I tend to think about the journey of organizations or individuals in the form of S-curves. Okay, so an S-curve of technology is, it starts out and then it goes through an explosive phase of adoption, and then things plateau, and then there you sort of exist on the flat part, and you have to reinvent yourself and embrace a new S-curve if you want to continue to make progress. And so if you look at all individual lives, the ones who are successful are able to reinvent themselves periodically. Same is true of great organizations, as opposed to those who plateau and then decay into irrelevance. And so I want to use that metaphor for India and our progress, our journey. And to me, it feels like our first S-curve was winning our freedom from Britain and just learning to survive. Ram Gua's terrific books talk about what an astonishing feat it was for India to merely, stabilize and survive in the first 20, 30 years after winning our independence. So that feels like very much our first S-curve. I would say that our second S-curve was when some of our leaders realized that what got us here won't take us further. And from an economic perspective, we embraced liberalization 30 years ago. And then that unleashed a whole bunch of innovation, entrepreneurship, fueled by trade, et cetera, that Naushad talked about. And we've made incredible progress over the last 30 years. And the question is that enough? Or are we again plateauing and at a risk of losing our way in the woods? Or is it time to reinvent ourselves? And therefore, what might the next S-curve over the next 25 years that takes us to 100 look like? And there I want to say that I'm a great student of history. And one of the most influential thinkers has been this Nobel Prize winning economist called Ned Phelps. Naushad, and you probably know him very well. For men, I've been more influenced by his ideas on how societies become prosperous than any other economist. And so, his thesis is looking at why did Britain, which was a very mediocre nation in 1700, why did it diverge from other countries and become the most dominant economic and military power over the next 200 years? And then why did it lose its way, and why did that mantle pass to the US? And then now he argues that the dynamism is passing to China. And the answer is quite remarkable, very refreshing, different from a lot of the other economists. And he points to modern values, a society's embrace of modern values as the core of this. So he says, look, what happened in 18th, 19th century Britain and 20th century America, and now what's happening in China is essentially there is a environment which empowers individuals of no great pedigree. They don't all go to IITs, of no great abilities to pursue their own paths. And many of them start tinkering. Many of them start inventing. Some of them start businesses. And as more and more and more people start tinkering, inventing, and pursuing their ideas, some of these things actually amount to very significant ideas and very significant businesses. And that becomes the locomotive for the society to progress. And his book was called Mass Flourishing. So it wasn't about concentrated flourishing, for instance. He says the very nature of this is that more and more and more people join this. It becomes a movement, and some of them achieve extraordinary success. And it made a great deal of sense to me, because when you look at a very different field, you look at India's progress in cricket, for instance. When did we actually start winning and becoming a great cricketing nation, as opposed to a merely passionate country with a lot of potential? It happened when we became more inclusive. And people like Dhoni and others who had, didn't naturally grow up in English-speaking environments were able to bring their prodigious talent and energy to the game. And so as cricket became more and more democratic and inclusive, it allowed more and more talent to come in and rise to the top. And there was a bit of a meritocracy. And I think that had a great deal to do with India's success as a cricketing nation. And so that's sort of the point out here. So then Ned talks about, okay, if that's what happens, what are these modern values specifically that a country or society needs to embrace? And three things stand out for me. The first is what Naushad you already talked about, which is a focus on individualism, a belief that every individual has some talent and the right and the freedom to pursue the expression of that talent. Okay, so no individual needs permission from a higher authority, a priesthood, older people to pursue their dreams and aspirations. That is a very basic human right, a natural right. And they create an environment where that is possible. The second thing is a value of risk-taking and an acceptance, therefore, that the failure is okay. So the ability for lots and lots of people to go pursue their dreams, not all dreams are going to work out exactly the way or the first time, is very important. You look at a city like Bangalore, where more and more people, their first ambition is not a government job like the rest of India, but it is to either be part of a startup or do your own startup. And many of them fail. And right now, a lot of them are failing. And that's okay. That's actually celebrated, not discouraged. So this idea of the societal value of risk-taking is very important. And the third one is a recognition that wealth and prosperity gets created through entrepreneurship. And therefore, entrepreneurship is something to be celebrated. And, Napoleon derisively called England a nation of shopkeepers. But guess who had the last laugh? So these values seem really important. And then they go back to something even more fundamental, which is the Enlightenment. How did these values come about? They came about because for the previous 100, 200 years, you had the Enlightenment happening in Europe, where they said, look, individualism and what Naushad calls liberal values are really foundational. The importance of reason and looking at evidence and critical thinking is very important. And tolerance is very important. Okay, so we're willing to accept people of very different beliefs with very different ideas and let the best ideas win. So it feels to me that what has not yet happened in our country is that we haven't gone through some sort of an enlightenment when it comes to this shift of values. And therefore, we continue to hope for a better future, but with the same value system to a very large extent, except in little pockets. Some of our large cities may have moved, but much of India has not. And so to me, if you ask me what is the big hope that I have, it is that in the next 25 years, we're actually able to achieve this societal shift of values. Now, with that is a critical value around rule of law. One of the things that worries me profoundly is that we're building this great society, this great economy on a foundation of complete sand. And I say that because of the absence of rule of law. And our legal system, its problems are well known and understood in terms of delays and unfairness. For instance, it takes 20 years to get Navjot Sidhu to jail for killing a person. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. And until you have your own personal brush with law and realize the lack of justice and what it can mean, it all feels very academic. And I 7 years ago, fortunately, had that brush with justice, and it left me feeling very bruised and very scared. So, foundational for all progress has to be where everybody is equal before the law, and you get access to justice in both a speedy and fair manner. And I think this becomes very important, particularly at a time when you have the state becoming bigger and bigger. And if you want to protect individual freedoms, you need a strong independent judiciary, which is able to adjudicate this. When we have a real risk of, majoritarianism, then it becomes even more important. India, for all our economic progress, does extremely poorly in terms of rule of law when it comes to enforcement of contracts, just the business side of things as opposed to the societal side of things. We're like 179 out of 200 countries. It's hard to imagine, even Pakistan's sort of better than us, and it's hard to imagine many countries that are worse than us. And so to me, this enlightenment, which includes the rule of law, is the big shift. Because, one of the reasons I agreed to come on this, not just because we're friends, is because of your framing, Arun. You said it's not about the what, okay? It's actually, how do we change our thinking? Because the what reflects our value systems and our beliefs. Why is India so unbelievably unequal and becoming more unequal? It's not just because of, a superficial answer is we embrace development policies that create and breed inequality. But it's also because we are fundamentally unequal in our minds. When we think about how we treat other people, like the maid and the driver, okay? Like we treat anybody who is other than us, it's very, very unequal. So, when it comes to paying for services, as I said, your cook, your guard, your driver, the Swiggy delivery person, we want to pay the minimum. We have no interest in understanding how is this person going to have a decent life? Being human, do they not also want dignity? Do they also not want to advance? Do they not have the same aspirations to provide their children a better education and better prospects? How are they supposed to do this when you pay them 20,000 rupees, which is the top 10% of India? How are you supposed to do it? So I think unless we go through this enlightenment individually and collectively, we're going to keep sort of rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, and we may get slightly better outcomes or slightly worse outcomes, but they're all going to be in the same paradigm. And so what I'm hopeful we can unpack a little bit in the rest of this conversation is this shift of mindsets, values. And I think this is a revolution that has to start from within each of us, and then you connect the dots. I don't think it's something that happens that you can wish will happen top down. There are many more things I could say, because there were such interesting comments from the young people and from my dear friend Naushad that they're very provocative, but then in the interest of time, I'll pause here.
Thank you so much, Ravi. You've deepened what we must discuss. We should not be, staying with what has been the subjects of discussion, free trade and formal jobs, and you've taken it deeper about how we think about things and go to more fundamental values. You mentioned some 3 values, as you said. The first is the focus on individualism, which you've heard from the young people also, a liberal value that every individual should have the freedom to shape their own lives. That's in our constitution also, but we don't live it. We say it, we don't live it. What I think the world is realizing, and why is the world having to question truths that it had taken for granted the last maybe 30, 50 years, because those truths in terms of how one runs a society, governs an economy, had been producing GDP growth everywhere. And people had been, getting out of poverty everywhere, China, India, Africa, even everywhere. So there was a sort of belief that we had the second S curve, as you put it, was good. But clearly the world has been shaken up. And, for the last 3-4 years, actually it started with the financial crisis in 2008. And then with the COVID crisis, we kept saying, we are not going to build back. We are going to create a new resilient world. Yeah. So that means we have to unlearn the things that had brought us success so far and just question that maybe those things were causing the problems that we now want to solve, which is what Einstein said, it's madness to try and solve the intractable problems that you suddenly realize you have with the same methods, which you know how to do very well, but they may have been causing the very problems. So this is where, I begin to, as an inquirer, and saying, let's just have a clean sheet, as it were, almost, and question these more fundamental values which have been driving our methods. Focus on individualism. It is being recognized everywhere in the world by social scientists and by economists that people yearn for social connection. Yes, that is what gives them a feeling of goodness in life. It gives them a feeling of security. They get resilience in their lives when they're people that they can count on, they can trust, and they count on. And by the way, trust, as people said, is very good for the growth of the economy also. Trust in whom? It's in others. So the quality of society, social cohesion, matters as much as individual liberty to people. And we have been driving economics certainly on the belief that everybody can and should be free to, make something of themselves. And if it doesn't work out in your life, it's your fault. You must take responsibility for yourself. And so Michael Sandel's lovely book about the tyranny of merit And this is in the United States, where he's describing how mental problems are increasing amongst young people, social problems are increasing so greatly in the United States. And he links it very much to this belief that, oh, the economy and society have given you all the opportunities that you need. If you don't make it, it's your fault. So you're not looking at the structures of society and the economy, which make it very hard for some people to get the opportunities that others have. And we're talking here of the United States, how privilege gets into education, privilege gets into how firms are run, into how policies are shaped, and so on, the fundamentals of governance of a society. And so we have to question that too, that maybe we've gone too far with saying individuals and telling our young people in India, it's up to you, create a job for yourself and create a job for 10,000 more people. It's not easy. The system around makes it very difficult to do this. So second, the point therefore, one is about individualism must be balanced, if I will, or situated within social cohesion. Otherwise, individuals start getting pathologies and they can't succeed and the economy will not grow. You talked about, you and I have been working on, Ravi, for a while, is entrepreneurship. And as you said, wealth, certainly in the economy, wealth is created through entrepreneurship, and Silicon Valley and Bangalore, we have many good examples of that. But when you talk about social wealth, the things that money can't buy, and we need entrepreneurship there also. So there, what are the skills that young people need? What's the orientations that young people need? How would they measure the progress of their lives and their contribution to society? When it's social change, it's systems change. It's not just creating another unicorn that they should be aiming for. And again, Sandel's book, Michael Sandel's, of thinking about what money can't buy. And this conversation that we listened to with the young people of Kashmir this morning, Ravi, and they were talking about, the dignity that they want to have for themselves and in their lives. They are looked down upon as if they are the source of all the problems that we are creating for India and perhaps the world. They're such lovely people and very smart. I mean, they've also had their MBAs and they've had their engineerings, but what they care about was about producing a change in their society, which would be good for the dignity of everybody. And so you did talk about, creating jobs, and Naushad said so too, in which people have dignity. And it shouldn't be just jobs, we're talking of entrepreneurs. So these are the thoughts that have come to my mind, but one on law really intrigues me, Ravi. The US is governed by law, but my goodness, they can't change their gun laws. They can't change abortion laws. Many human beings are being deprived of the right to life, being killed by guns, right to life in terms of women, reproductive health, on the grounds of right to life. And what is the law doing about it? Their society is unable to make laws which are humane, which are modern and current. So we have to, then India, we have the opportunity to rethink what we mean by law, how laws are made. And so it comes to we the people, and therefore to the conversation. And with that, I'm going to ask you both a question, but here it is. I liked very much what the Indrajit said and Arjun said about, they framed their talk here. What was the slide? The title was Talking to Young India. I noticed that, talking to young India. And what he said was, we learned in the hard way that it's very hard to listen. We've got to, I think, people stop, framing what we want to say to others to convince them to learn to listen. And are we? So I asked the question, this is the one again, that to myself and to you, Ravi, and to Naushad, that what we are describing, the three of us together now, is this what all Indians want? And how do we know? And I could then ask the question, does it matter if they don't know? I mean, they don't know enough about anything. We've learned a lot. We are connected with the world. We got the best ideas. We just got to get on and do it. So are we sure that we know the shape of India that all Indians, especially all young Indians, want, which they would be willing to give their lives to create? How do we know this? Do we know this? And of course, as I said, does it matter? Why waste our time listening to them? So I'm going to ask you back, Ravi, first, and then to Naushad.
Yeah. No, I think these are excellent questions. and I want to react not just to the question you posed, but to a couple of points you made. First of all, I think you make a very valuable point saying, look, just in extreme individualism has its own problems. And so you want to balance that individualism in individual rights and liberties, with also social cohesion, which arguably Northern Europe and Western Europe have found a better balance. And the key here is trust, and trust in institutions, trust in each other. And I think what you see in the US is what happens when you have extraordinary polarization and breakdown of trust, in which case the society gets paralyzed. And I think we are potentially at some risk of that in our own country as well. Back to the question on, is this what young people really want and so forth? Actually, I think we can answer that with some confidence. Now, the introduction was short, but for the last 4 years, I've been working with our mutual friend Madan at UNICEF. And I spend more than half my time these 4 years helping give shape to this mission called Generation Unlimited. It's a global mission. And the idea is to engage young people between the particularly ages of 15 to 24 and give them the mindset and skills they will need to flourish in a world that is changing so dramatically. And of course, the largest population of these 300 million of the 1.8 billion are in India. And so India has been the locus of a lot of our work. And so through our work with youth organizations, we've engaged with an extraordinarily large number of people. We have a tech platform also, so to get dynamic feedback. And so I think we can say with some confidence that we have a decent pulse on a lot of what young India wants. And it is not profoundly different from some of the comments that filtered in with a narrower sample. I think young India, the mistake that we would make is to talk to young India rather than talk with young India. And the mistake we would be making is to continue to have this narrative around jobs. Okay, I think this idea that what we need to do is skill young people and put them in jobs is an extraordinarily narrow framing that doesn't do service to what the aspirations and potential of young India or young people everywhere is. I think what we need to do is think about them as the world's largest army of problem solvers, change makers, who have both the ambition, the energy, and the aptitude to help create a better future. And somebody is going to do that by inventing something. Somebody is going to do that by starting a business that creates 3 jobs. Somebody is going to do that by solving some community problem out there, like the toilets in the school don't work, or there's garbage that isn't being cleared. Somebody is going to do that by healing wounds. Somebody is going to, and they may do that through music, through drama, through whatever other thing. And so the question is, how do you engage many, many more people and give them the sense of agency that it's fine for them to follow this path and support them in that? Okay, and as you said, it's not easy because very large number of them are excluded. They're excluded economically or on the basis of caste or religion or some such thing. But over 4 years, we've seen, no, it's very possible. And the foundational work is around, like Ashoka does, engaging young people as change makers. And you help them get in small groups in their local communities, in their local schools, and make very small changes and improvements. And from that, they get on they get the self-confidence and the leadership skills to take on bigger and bigger challenges. And so that's one big vector. And the other important intervention is help, and this we see in Kashmir, and particularly in the most poignant way, Kashmir does actually a decent job on education, on basic education. They have amongst the better, literacy and educational outcomes. But then the young people, the ones, I've spent a lot of time with, are clueless about what they can do with their lives. Even more so than the rest of India, they live in a bubble and they have no sense of the array of opportunities they can pursue. So the other intervention that becomes really important is some sort of guidance that helps a young person figure out what do I enjoy doing, what am I good at, and therefore what pathway could I follow. And we found that remarkably small interventions can be powerful, and we saw a brief glimpse of that this morning. 20 people with very, very different ideas around the ways in which they wanted to build a better future for their state, for themselves. And so, yeah, I think this is what we do. But don't frame this as create jobs, skill them, and put them in these damn things. It is such a restrictive definition. Sorry, Naushad. And so in my book, I talk about the importance of this emerging idea called the passion economy, which is how do you help every person, young or old, figure out what they're passionate about and reasonably good at, and find a way to get paid for it so that you can have a sustainable life doing that. And so I think I've spoken enough, but the other sort of related idea is, and Arun, you know this, and Naushad, we talked about it in our book conversation. I think we have to redefine this idea of leadership. Okay, if we want to create a better future for our country and ourselves, then we have to stop talking of leadership as a noun or leaders as people with power, title, authority, and these things, but recognize leadership is much more fundamentally a verb. It's how you act that makes you a leader or not. And you can have a big title and be the most risk-averse political person, the antithesis of what leadership is. And conversely, you can be somebody from the humblest background, but the way you act, you inspire others to follow you and accomplish something great. So I think this revolution requires a disproportionate number of young people to begin to see themselves as agents of change and see the leadership potential within themselves. But I'll stop here.
Thank you. Younger people to see themselves as agents as change and not aspire to leadership positions. But Naushad, before I ask Charles what questions there are to you and to us from the YouTube, you might want to react to what Ravi said or to comment on something that both of us have said.
So just to pick up on the point on employment. First, I fully agree with the point on skills. I'm not a big believer in skilling programs. I'm a big believer in education programs, because there's a difference between the two. Education is meant to enable people to learn skills for themselves, because the skills that are relevant today are not going to be relevant 10 years out. And a good education should actually enable the individual, again, to acquire and master the skills that they need to be effective 10 years out. On the employment point, I'll come back to the point again. I think the passion economy is a wonderful end objective. I think the passion economy might even be possibly an objective for Singapore today, with a population of 5 million people. But I worry about its viability in a country of 1.4 billion people, when we need to create 10 million effective livelihoods this year. And I don't think there's an alternative to mass employment opportunities for a period of time that becomes an essential foundation for people to then start having enough of a resource to be able to pursue their passions. But I think getting people supported, employed, earning enough in the short term is what our immediate goal has to be, and we have to do whatever that takes to get there. So it's not the opposite of what you're saying. I think it's more complementary to what you're saying.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And I think the bridge that connects what both of us are saying is this idea of mass entrepreneurship, or or democratizing what we're seeing in entrepreneurship to a much greater extent.
Yeah.
So there are millions of more enterprises, and many of these enterprises don't remain stunted and informal, but actually growing. And as they grow, they create a reasonable number of decent jobs.
Yeah.
I think that's the bridge.
That's
and for that, we need millions of more people, particularly young people, jumping in and starting businesses, both sublime and important and mundane. And I think, so I know philosophically we're quite aligned, but I think it was important to get this out there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
I want to actually comment on two of the other points, one that you made and one that Ravi made. His point about the rule of law, I think, is an essential and important point. And I want to come back to it again, because it is an important, essential role for the state. You've heard me talk about this, Arun. We've spoken about it a few times. I believe that in India, we have very limited state capacity. That comes across in almost every part of what we see happening in the country. We can formulate policy, but our ability to deliver on the ground is highly limited. As a result, we need to intervene in limited areas, in focused areas, and do only those things that a state can do. And then not try to meddle and get involved in everything. One of those areas is the rule of law. That only the state can do. It's an essential role for the state. And it comes down to the criminal justice system, and it comes down to the judiciary. So those are the two pieces that deliver the rule of law to society. It's an essential role for the state, and we shouldn't move away from the state playing that role. But that means then that the state doesn't need to play its role in identifying which products industry should make, what should be incentivized, what should be subsidized. All of that stuff is unnecessary. Let the state focus on only what it can do, and not get involved in other things. The second point has to do with your point on trust, right? Trust in society is indeed very important. And the question of, do you trust strangers, is a question that gets answered in different societies in different ways. As Ravi mentioned, it's not answered in a very healthy way in the US today. It's answered in a healthier way in some of the Scandinavian countries, certainly today. And trust, they say, comes down to social capital. And social capital has two pieces to it. You have bonding capital, things where we relate one to the other and trust others because they're like us. So you bond with people of the same community, you bond with people who have the same education, you bond with people who've gone to the same school, and so on and so forth. But bonding capital is not enough. You also need bridging capital. You need bridging capital that enables you to go from one group to another group. And you need to build that bridging capital over time. And how do you build that bridging capital over time? That's where you need the rule of law. So every individual knows that they can believe, they know they'll get justice, and you need the right conversations. So I want to end with the conversations piece, because that's what you're so good at, Arun. That's the part that you've been driving into our heads for the last 30, 40 years, right? Saying, listen, have the right conversations, listen as much as you talk. And as you listen and as you understand, then respond. Integrate as much as you possibly can in the way in which we formulate our own view of what the right things are to do going forward. So let me turn it back to you then.
Thank you. So Charles, let's listen to the people who've been listening to us.
And yes, there are a few questions here. So S. Rajiv, and probably, maybe Mr. Venkatesan and then Mr. Forbes could take this up. S. Rajiv says that Bharat is rising, but is India keeping pace? The rural parts are rising because of infrastructure partly, but the cities are not necessarily so. And he also says that he means that in a trade restricted world, traditional paths of export-led growth will not work. We have to look at our own internal market, that is Bharat. So, Mr. Venkatesan, maybe you could go first and then Mr. Forbes.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting question. And I want to just pick up the latter part of it, which is where is the growth going to come from? And I'm actually very, very optimistic that there is more growth opportunities than we know what to do with. But like food that we don't know how to digest, we have to develop new capabilities. So of course, we still have the opportunity to have export-led growth through both products and services, particularly as the patterns of global trade are going to change with the polarization we are seeing between the West and China. So India does have opportunity there. But beyond that, I look at the fact that we have to move towards a more sustainable economy. We have to reinvent everything from energy to transportation, reinvent how food is grown, how it is brought to our table. We have to, reinvent green materials, including steel, cement, all these things in the next 30, 40 years. And, it remains, particularly for a country like ours, one of the most important opportunities there is to create new businesses, create lots of jobs, flourishing, and so forth. On the issue of whether Bharat is rising, are the cities keeping pace, and so forth, there are much more informed opinions in Naushad and Arun, but my sense is both are challenged. It is not evident to me from my limited travels across smaller towns and my knowledge of what's happening in bigger cities that either is exactly flourishing. I think we see all trends pointing to a great divergence. There's great inequality, and also more fundamentally, the social fabric of India tearing in a very dramatic way, and trust collapsing, which means, I wouldn't measure it, as Arun cautioned us right at the beginning, I wouldn't measure it in strictly economic terms alone. So I would say neither is exactly rising right now, and that's the whole purpose of this conversation.
Thank you. Sweta, bring the questions in, please.
You're on mute.
Mute.
Sorry. There's another one, and this one is from Sunil Mehrotra of Idea Farms. He says that we need to come on the same page on what the word jobs really means. And Devanshu Datta also commented something similar. He said that we don't only wish to reach high, but to raise the floor, what we allow as a minimum acceptable existence. Would any of you like to respond to that?
I'm going to take the to say that because I have worked with Naushad. Naushad, you'll recollect this well over the years. India at 75, which C.K. Prahlad helped us as CII to create as a movement, chose skilling as the key to young Indians being able to earn enough and then contributing to the demographic dividend of India. So we made it like a program, 500 million people to be skilled, a target set, and a vision of India with 500 million skilled people. That's fine, but the people who were being skilled weren't being adequately employed, not earning enough. And so what's the point of skilling them? So you have to look at the whole system. Improving only one part of it without improving the related other parts of it just makes the system unhealthier rather than healthier. So when Naushad was president of CII, the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, asked Naushad to ask from out of the box. Economists know and government knows, but India needs a new solution. We need to find another way for young people to feel that their life is good, that they can earn enough and so on. So we did listening to the young people around the country and different experts and people who are in different subjects like urbanization, agriculture, and so on, where opportunities would lie. And we then titled what we presented for discussion in the country, but hasn't been discussed, unfortunately. It was no longer saying jobs. It said livelihoods, enterprises, and incomes. That should be the focus. And whether jobs will create it or something else will create it, or ultimately people want is better incomes, more sense of their own enterprise, and better livelihoods, living with the people around them and nature around them and earning at the same time. So in that, the systems thinking brought out very clearly that there was a challenge. There was a belief that large formal organizations would be the way to create the jobs India needs. Whereas around the world, economies have changed, technology is changing economies, business models have changed. Large organizations produce very few jobs in anywhere in the world. So we got to start saying, well, the reality of technology and the economy would require a different solution than the one that we have been used to. And that solution that we are used to, you would say, is the planning solution, that you decide how many factories and how large they should be and where they should be and give them incentives to put up those factories at one shot. And thereafter hope there'll be a trickle out of further jobs. But it hasn't happened like that. So within India, what would be the solutions? And so we came to the connection between the rural and the urban. You can't separate that. And so, talking about, which is quite interesting, that India is the cities and the rural is Bharat. And I remember Gandhiji saying, actually, India lives in its villages. If you're one country, the two are together. One needs the other. And so we looked at the whole system and we came with some very insightful solutions on the nature of work. It's not jobs. It's the nature of work, which is productive work and work which doesn't damage the environment and produces goodness for society and the environment. And in the three themes that Arjun mentioned, you notice at the beginning, the very first one was that young people don't want the 9-to-5 regime. Those are formal jobs. They're saying, the idea of formal organization which creates formal jobs, we don't even want that. I mean, firstly, the economy can't create those anymore, much more. And we also don't want that. So the question of formality, what is a formal organization? What is an informal organization? What is a formal job? What is an informal job? Forget these categories. What would enable? What sort of enterprise? What sort of work? And how connected with the rest of the system would it have to be to enable people to have sustainable growth of their incomes through livelihoods, work, jobs, call it what you will, enterprises to do that. So solutions were there. And I would say you could use them again just as a starting point, as a straw man, to stir up conversations. If the central problem of India, which I agree with Naushad very, very much, and I think Ravi, of course, agrees, and that's why he's solving the problem in his way, more entrepreneurship, that we just have to rethink, unlearn what we have learned about what a job is and what an organization is and so on. And it's not industrial policy, as I was in the planning commission, and people told me it's a bad word. I said, I never used the word industrial policy. I've been asked to figure out with people in India how we could grow industry in India. Industry could be small industries, big industries, how to grow them so that we can produce what we need for the people and people can earn. Oh, so you're going to have an industrial policy? That's a bad word. I said, I never said industrial policy. We're going to have some policies which will create growth of incomes through manufacturing, like Naushad said, and so on. So, we have these ideological biases that industrial policy is bad, planning is bad. Well, you can't achieve anything unless you make some sort of a broad strategic plan for it. It need not be with budgets assigned and milestones, but you need a plan. And so we got to think together. What do we want in the country? And as Naushad, you said, we better listen and learn to listen around, and then a collective journey that we will take together with young people joining with us. But we older people are going to have to play our roles. You can't just pass the buck on to them. But we have the resources, we command some positions to go with that. So the question wasn't asked to me, but it's a central discussion that has come up through. So I took the opportunity, so thank you, Sweta. But let's get to the next one.
Yeah. So Devanshu Datta makes another observation. He says that in China too, There is a generation emerging that has dropped out of the rat race. Our mistake would be to expect youngsters to express the same level of enthusiasm for things that we are excited by. Do you observe this? And if you do, then what might be the way to get them back in the...
I'm going to this is a question I asked both Ravi and Naushad. Are you sure that what's exciting you, exciting us, really excites the young people, right? Ravi and then Naushad.
I think first thing is the world has changed, and then, people have changed. So if you think about the world that the three of us grew up in, there were very limited definitions of success and pathways, acceptable pathways to success. And the stereotypical ones were engineer, doctor, scientist, chartered accountant, whatever. And you had to be one of those. Today, we live in a world where I think there are vastly more, opportunities, many more definitions of what success could look like. You could be a successful stand-up comedian and have a bunch of followers on TikTok and be, doing quite okay. There are many ways of monetizing this and creating value and making a living and so forth. So in that sense, things have changed. And with that, I think people also are attracted to different pathways. And we need to recognize that rather than sort of funnel a lot of young people down limited pathways, whether they're good at it, whether they want it, enjoy it or not. And so I fully believe that what we need to do is engage lots of young people, give them a exposure to a wide variety of pathways and opportunities out there, allow them to choose a bit based on aptitude and interest, and then provide, as Arun said, some of the support that you can, because they do need support, okay, particularly if you're coming from a disadvantaged background. And certainly formal jobs remains an important, exciting aspiration for many. The ones who would decry the importance of jobs are those who already have one. So you can afford to take it for granted, but no. So formal jobs are important. Entrepreneurship of different sorts is important. The ability to tackle societal problems, social problems, is exciting. The ability to just express the talent you have and find a way to get paid for it is, I think, important. Yeah, so that's what I'd say. I think it's a vastly more exciting time to be young than it was in 1985.
I'm just going to add one thing, which is Foxconn in China employs 1.2 million people in its factories. 400,000 people in one single factory. It's the single largest factory they have anywhere in the world. A large garment company in Bangladesh employs 30 to 50,000 people. A large garment company in India employs 3,000 to 5,000 people. These are not exciting jobs. These are mundane, probably quite drudge-like jobs. But they provide that livelihood, which these individuals otherwise would not have. And we should not in, I think, any way underestimate the importance that they have in putting millions of unskilled, relatively unskilled people to providing them with livelihoods that are decent so that they have a decent life. And if not them, then their next generation at least can become participants in the passion economy.
Thank you. Naushad, I heard Ravi say that formal jobs will remain very important, but they will not solve the whole problem. Right? Yeah. And in India, the formal economy, the large factories that you mentioned and all together, they probably employ less than 5% of all Indians, 3% I'm told, but let's say 5%. In China also, Foxconn and everybody add up to about 20%. offer. Okay. And in the US also, the large formal economy employs not even 50%. So there is a large number of people everywhere in the world who are employed in this so-called informal economy, and they live. And some of them are finding it hard to live because they're looked down upon and they're not supported because they're informal.
I'm just trying to make the argument that, you know, I think too often, if we see formal jobs as being something that's of the past, I think that's wrong. I think we have to see it as part of the present and the future. But that doesn't mean it's the only way forward. It doesn't mean it's the only occupation that people will have. You need all of it.
Right. I think we're in agreement now, all three of us. Ravi, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just, I find it quite interesting. So when you think about trees and plants that suck carbon out, and it's the same thing. It's not a full-grown large tree that takes out a bunch of CO2. It is the growth of a small tree into a large tree that sucks CO2 and stores it as wood. And it's exactly the same metaphor for jobs. The large don't, the stunted don't, but it is the growth of a large number of really tiny ones into small ones and a few small ones into Naushad type enterprises. That movement is what creates the employment. And in India, that growth is stuck. And sure, the large ones are growing larger, the small ones stay small, but this pathway, this escalator is what is broken, and we have to create the conditions which allow this growth to happen. So whole complicated other story, but anyway.
Yeah, so thank you. I think, Shweta, we have just 5 more minutes, so we can get just one more question, and we won't summarize anything. It's an ongoing conversation. So
Right. So this question is by Milind Kank. He says that he's involved with a group of 180 young second-generation sons and daughters of businessmen, but he sees no passion in them. What might be the reason for this?
Milind, my friend, this is what I've been saying to several people. You're talking to the wrong young people. Ravi is saying, he's amazed, and so am I. The passion of young people, and the survey also showed. Come on, are you talking to them or listening to them? And what's a sampling? This was my point to Indrajit. Please, let's not believe that the few people that we talk to represent all of India. And if you're feeling despondent by the few we talk to, India is so rich and wide, go look elsewhere. There'll be somebody else who you'll find a great inspiration.
I want Milind to buy them all a copy of this book so they can figure out what they're really passionate about, if it isn't what they're doing.
Yeah.
I think most young people are actually very passionate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Milind, you're talking to the wrong young people.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I think we're at this point, Sweta, where we should be now concluding. And now this is where Ravi and Naushad, if you're going to say one sentence, if you feel like, as to say us, look, this is what we must stop doing, and this is what we must do more of to change the course, not the things we have to do, but how we will accomplish whatever we choose to do. What must change about the way we are going about getting this whole country to move together?
Well, I'll let the guy who's smarter go first. Naushad, you go.
You can go. Well, okay. So I mean, one thing. So I would say, just following on from what we've been talking about, believe in the equal merit of each individual, and search for how we can fulfill the dreams of more and more individuals in our future. And one thing that we shouldn't do, I don't believe in silver bullets. I don't believe in great leaders who are going to take us to some desired destination. I think it's a collective job.
Thanks, you. Lovely. Ravi?
Fabulous. So what I would add is that fabulous quote of Einstein or Deming. I think it was Deming. It says, every system is perfectly designed to produce the outcomes it does, especially the bad outcomes. So if we take any of the things that we wish to see improve, whether it's jobs and prosperity or education or health, it's the outcome of a system. And therefore, if we don't like the output, change the system. But the problem is the system is itself a manifestation of our beliefs and values. And therefore, if we don't go back to understanding what are our most deepest, most hidden assumptions, beliefs, and values, the system ain't going to change. So I'd say that today's conversation is a nice start in that direction. And we need to go back and revisit those assumptions that we hold individually. Forget what others believe, etc. What do we believe about individualism and trust and rule of law and all these kinds of things, and question that. So that's what I'd say.
Terrific. So I'll just summarize in a minute. So I am putting it in the framework of a systems thinking, and I know Sunil asked a question and you'll be very familiar, and many of you, the iceberg, which says that the things that you want to work on and the problems that you see are those which are visible to you above the water. They're easy to see, and you notice them and you react to them. But those, like in an iceberg, there's a much larger part which is beneath the water, which gives the iceberg its form and weight, are caused by those problems on the top by the structures below. And that is to Donella Meadows and Deming's quote that every system is perfectly designed to produce the results it's presently producing, both the good results as well as the bad results. So look at the whole system. That is, look at, as we say, the structures beneath the events that you see on the top and the trends that you see on the top. And those structures are the institutions of law, maybe, yes, the institutions of government, the institutions of business. Their construction is creating the good things as well as the things we want to see less of, but we are beginning to see more of above the waterline in the graphs. And as Ravi said, the designs of our institutions and the designs of our laws are founded on some beliefs. And those beliefs must change. And if we do believe that it's the people and their will that should be manifested through the institutions, then a conversation between the people themselves about what is it we, the people, want must happen. One, for that reason, it has to be a collective aspiration. The other is because people do have different perspectives, they're able to see different aspects of that system above them. They see different aspects of the law, different aspects of industry, and different aspects of business and entrepreneurship and the environment. So they will, by the collective conversation, be able to collectively develop a better picture of the system and then together see what is causing the problems that they wish to now eliminate above the waterline. So this is a good framework for the conversations that we need to have. The heart of it is listening to people not like yourself. Just go out and find somebody who you disagree with or who looks like he's a terrorist or something, and bring yourself to just say, why does this person believe what this person does as strongly as I seem to believe what I do? It's very educative. It's very educative about oneself as well as about the world around oneself. So thank you so much, Ravi and Naushad, for a lively conversation. I wish we'd do it again.
Thank you, Arun. Thanks.
Thank you to all the three panelists and to the participants watching this live stream. Thank you very much for spending your Saturday evening with us. But this is not the end. We'll keep this project going. And the very next thing coming your way is takeaways and reactions from some very interesting and thoughtful people. We've invited 6 such people to present their reflections on what we've heard today and to keep this conversation going. There's Anuradha Rao, who's former Deputy Managing Director, Strategy and Digital Banking with State Bank of India. Ajit Rangnekar, former Dean of Indian School of Business. Shailesh Haribhakti, who is an independent director at some of the country's most preeminent organizations. Meenakshi Ramesh, who is Executive Director, United Way, Chennai. Jagan Shah, who is a Senior Fellow at Artha Global. And Biju Dominic, who's Chairman at Final Mile Consulting. So by Monday, 2 p.m., we'll share the reflections as well as the recording and the key takeaways from today. So have a great evening. Till next time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Naushad, Ravi, Sweta, and everybody who's listening in. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Ram, have we finished the recording?
It says live still.